and welcome back to the NWA 1983 project. I'm your host, Lex G, and with me, as always, is Terry Funk.
Are you a sissy?
Terry, how can you say those things to me? That's very mean.
You know why? Because he is nothing more than an overbearing, obnoxious, putrid, egg-sucking dog.
Terry, what's the matter? What's wrong with you?
Get somebody to help me. My eye. My goddamn eye. My eye. Where is it?
Well, it'll get better.
My eye. Where is that chicken? Where's that damn coward?
Now that's enough, Terry. That's ridiculous.
You yellow pig! Pig!
Now, Terry, you're invading my safe space. You're gonna have to go. Get out of here.
You yellow pig! Pig!
Put Matt on. Put Matt on, damn it.
Pig!
Matt, are you there?
Yes, you egg-sucking dog.
Why is Terry Funk at your house?
I don't know. He just came by for some candy or something. I don't know.
He really hurt my feelings.
Yeah. Tough love. Tough love.
What are you going to do? All right, so this episode will be another cornucopia of wrestling action throughout the NWA as we build up to our big Houston show, Houston Wrestling. It'll be live on closed circuit from the Houston Summit, and it'll be fantastic. Now, guys, if you guys know anything about Paul Bosch's Wrestling Spectaculars, he would book literally the best talent throughout the NWA and sometimes the AWA. He would have multiple champions on the card. He would have the NWA champion, and he would have the AWA champion, and these cards would be stacked. Now, he didn't book his own wrestlers. He was basically booking out of the Dallas territory. And like Gary Hart or I think Buck Robley or whoever was booking Dallas would book Houston, but Paul Bosch would want, guys on the card. So he would have a card with, I want Harley Race, and I would want Dusty Rhodes, and I want Ernie Ladd, and I want Andre the Giant, and I want Ric Flair, and I want Roddy Piper, and I want this guy, that guy, and the other guy. That's what made Houston so unique and special, because it would have Nick Bockwinkel and Harley Race on the show, and it'd be completely insane. We'll get a taste of that when we do that show next time. So next up will be Houston Wrestling coming up. I think overall, it's going to be a fantastic show, and I'm really excited about that. But for this episode, we will be discussing the evolution of wrestling merchandise, wrestling toys, and so on and so forth. What that kind of looked like in the 80s and what it looks like now. So, Matt, tell me about your first wrestling action figure.
Oh, my God. It was probably, well, to be totally honest, it probably wasn't a wrestling action figure. Meaning, I always found the G.I. Joes way better to wrestle with. They could do pile drivers, DDTs, suplexes. The Star Wars, remember the monster in that big underground dwelling?
The Rancor?
The Rancor handler. I ripped off the headpiece, and he became my Abdul the Butcher.
Very nice.
Which, complete with razor cuts and red marker marks. Yeah, I was a fine kid. I think my first real toy was probably those goddamn hard plastic, probably made of like lead WWF toys, like the ones that didn't bend at all. Like I still am looking right now at my Brutus the Barber Beefcake one.
Very nice.
That was a gift actually from a girlfriend because he wasn't into wrestling. And, here, I got you this. And like, what the hell? It's like, oh, it's on a yard sale. So I took somebody else's childhood joy, and now it's mine.
So what Matt's referring to is the LJN Wrestling Superstars action figure line that ran from 1984 to 1989. Again, they're an 8-inch hard rubber. Literally, you beat your brother to death with it if you hit him with it. Probably the only known action figure of SD Jones in that line. And he wears a Hawaiian shirt for some reason. Completely ridiculous, but ridiculously awesome. I desperately always wanted the Hulk Hogan with the white shirt and red trunks, but I never got it. And I think it's super expensive now. To give everyone a feel about what action figures were in these lines, it started in, like I said, 1984, and you had Andre the Giant, Big John Studd, Hillbilly Jim, Hulk Hogan, the Iron Sheik, Jimmy Snuka, Junkyard Dog, Nikolai Volkov, and Roddy Piper, and that's the first wave. Series 2, which was in 85, you had another Andre the Giant, Brutus Beefcake, George Animal Steel, Greg the Hammer Valentine, King Kong Bundy, Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff. Series 3 in 1986, you had Bobby the Brain Heenan, Bruno Sammartino, Captain Lou Albano, Classy Freddie Blassie, Corporal Kirshner, David Boy Smith, Magnificent Morocco, Dynamite Kid, Jesse the Body Ventura, Jimmy Hart, Mr. Fuji, Randy Savage, Mean Gene Oakland, Ricky Steamboat, S.D. Jones, Terry Funk, and Tito Santana. Series 4 in 1987, you had Adrian Adonis, Billy Jack Haynes, Bret the Hitman Hart, Beef, Brian Blair, which is a strange name to me, Cowboy Bob Orton, Elizabeth, King Harley Race, Hercules Hernandez, Jake the Snake Roberts, Jumping Jim Brunzell, Jim the Anvil Neidhart, Ken Patera, Kamala, Coco Beware with Frankie, Outback Jack, Ted Arcidi, and Vince McMahon. Series 5 in 1988, you had Axe, Bam Bam Bigelow, Hacksaw Jim Duggan, Honky Tonk Man, Hulk Hogan, One Man Gang, Random Referee, we'll call him Danny Davis, Luscious, Johnny Valiant, Rick Martel, Slick, Ted DiBiase, and Tito Santana and his Strike Force trunks. Series 6 in 1989, you had Andre the Giant, Big Boss Man, Haku, Rick Rude, The Ultimate Warrior, and The Warlord. And then they had re-releases on Series 6, which was Hulk Hogan, Big John Studd, Brutus Beefcake, Bam Bam Bigelow, Honky Tonk Man, Jake Roberts, Demolition Axe, Randy Savage, Miss Elizabeth, Bret Hart, Ted DiBiase, Hacksaw Jim Duggan, and Adrian Adonis. And then they had tag team box sets, the British Bulldogs, the Dream Team, Hart Foundation, Hulk Hogan, Hillbilly Jim, Iron Sheik and Nikolai Volkov, the Killer Bees, and Strike Force. They also had a Sling 'em and Fling 'em wrestling ring, cage match accessory as well. Like Matt was saying, you can literally knock someone unconscious with one of these. Awesome. And strange enough, I see an axe, but I don't see a smash. So no smash. I could be wrong. Let's see. So, going back through history, I think the original forms of merchandise in terms of professional wrestling were the Wrestler 8x10 with the autograph on it, and the wrestling program. That's probably, for the longest time, that's probably what they had for the most part. I know in the late 70s, they started with the first kind of incarnations of T-shirts. I know Hogan was a big proponent of that. I know they did a lot of that at Memphis as well, where the wrestlers had their own T-shirts. But it didn't really get going until the 80s. And the WWF merchandise catalog, which you would find in your programs, or you would find it in the WWF magazine. The funny thing about the catalog is there's kind of the ridiculous shit that's in it. So you would have hats and bandanas and headbands and Hulkamania shirts, and you would have Macho Man boxer shorts, and you would have Macho Man mugs and foam belts, Ultimate Warrior ties and duffel bags, and whatever could be made, they made it back in the day, especially in that catalog. They had Virgil shirts, for Christ's sakes, on there. And that's these particular items, and that's why there's such a hot commodity on the secondary market right now. And if you can find them, or if you own one of these things, they're awesome. But all this stuff is like super expensive now, if you can find it, because you can only purchase these items through the catalog. There was no other way to get them unless you went to a live event. But as we discussed in the past, the live event shows don't have a lot of variety in terms of product. I think overall it was completely ridiculous.
Yeah.
I bought a lot of shit from there, and it used to say 6 to 8 weeks for your shit to come. But, dude, that was like 4 months, bro. Actually used to take forever. Now with like Amazon Prime, you order something and you get it like 2 days later. And sometimes even quicker than that, depending. I'm pretty sure I had a drone drop off something the other day. It was weird. You know what I mean? I did also enjoy the WWF calendar. The 84 one especially, but the 85 one is pretty good too. In addition, when I was a kid, I had the WWF bedroom set, the sheet set, the bedding, and I got it for my birthday. And I'll tell this story because I've told this quite a bit. This is on 1991, 1991, 10th birthday. In my neighborhood, or pretty close to it, we had a giant arcade. Probably very similar to a Dave & Buster's, but more for kids. And then it had it had real arcade games, not like the ones they have in Dave & Buster's, like real, like Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat, like all these games.
Yeah.
And they do birthday parties. I had my birthday party. That's why I wanted to have it that year. So my mom, I get the invitations. And it was a wrestling, it was WWF themed party. So we had the cups and the balloons and all the shit. And my mom makes the invitations, and I'm sitting there. I think my party was at like 2:00 or whatever, and I'm sitting there and I'm waiting for my friends and my family members to show up, and they don't.
Oh.
So I'm sitting there at the long ass table, which looks like your random cafeteria table, with all this pizzas, with all the plates sets, with all the plates set up where they're supposed to be, and I'm sitting there, and no one came to my birthday party.
Oh.
They just. And I always wondered why no one came. Like, I stole everyone's. Like, you would get the cups full of tokens, so I just went around, took all the tokens, put them in my giant cups, and just went off and played video games for the rest of the day. Found out many years later that my mom forgot to send the invitations.
Oh. Oh.
But for that birthday, I got the WWF betting set. I also got the Hulk Hogan wrestling buddy as well that year.
Oh, dear.
So that was my 10th birthday party, and that's how I got my betting set, which is awesome because it has Macho King on it, and it was sweet.
Do you still have it?
I had curtains, man. I would put that in my living room if I could. It was awesome. So, Matt, tell me about some of the merchandise that you had over the years.
It's fun. I didn't have a whole lot of WWE.
I didn't have a lot. I didn't have T-shirts because back in my day, I think I told the story before. In the early '90s, if you wore a WWF T-shirt, especially something with Shawn Michaels saying "Sexy Boy" on it, you got beat up.
No, that wasn't the case. But more like I'm looking at my little wall of random crap here. I have a 4 Horsemen pennant that I got when the WCW/NWA came to the Boston Garden in 1988.
Nice.
I got to watch a fantastic show. The main event was the Horsemen, Sands, Luger with Ivan Koloff, and then the rest was the Sting, Dusty, Luger, and Barry team.
You know that pennant's probably worth like $200, by the way.
Oh, really?
All NWA stuff is super expensive online because number one, they didn't make a whole lot of it, and number two, there's not a whole lot of it around. So if you go on eBay looking for like, hey, I want like 1987 NWA stuff, yeah, you're not finding that shit nowhere.
Wow.
Yeah,
wow.
so.
That's good to know. I also looking at the World Heavyweight Championship belts from NWA, the old NWA main event, I think it was, or one of the weekend show logos on it, which when I lived in Georgia, Scott and I would have our wrestling matches at the apartment, which was all the time. It was kind of like Pink Panther. I'd be coming home like, oh my God, hit me with something, that was the belt we used. And then when we were in Vegas, he wrote Las Vegas on it and gave it to me as the, final champion.
Very nice.
I didn't have a lot of toys. I remember I had a friend, Scott White, and his parents were like
divorced.
Well, they were on the verge.
That's how my friends got cool stuff because their parents were divorced.
Yeah. Well, kind of that line. Like he had every WWF action figure. I mean, like I remember going to his house, and he had like this giant like those crates you see on TV, like John Candy's dragging along and planes, trains, and automobiles.
Yeah. Like
one of those just full, and he had the ring, and he had the cage, and it was like wow, damn. And credit where credit's due. Barry USA Stevens and Cowboy Jim Spur and Steve the Hitman Chambers were names he made up. So my nod to him was to bring them into the game.
Very nice.
But I always enjoyed the detail. It was kind of cool they spent time to put detail into it. But again, those first sets, the LJM ones, were just not good at all. And I used to use, as a kid, I used G.I. Joe. It was like, DDT, suplex,
Well, wrestling action figures didn't get good. Now, there's some people that argue that the Hasbro ones were good, but in terms of playability, not a whole lot you can do with, like, they weren't fully articulated. They would have, like, they would have gimmicks. Like, Hulk Hogan's slam and his hands are in a press slam position the entire time. Like, you can't punch anyone.
Right.
Those looked cool, and they actually did a re-release with modern wrestlers. So now there's a John Cena one that's in that style from 1990. There's like a Roman Reigns one. There's a Kevin Owens one. So it's a nice little nod to the past here. But I think overall, like, they weren't good. And then the action figures in the 90s were all shit. Like, Attitude Era action figures are the worst action figures you can possibly buy ever.
Really?
They're just god awful. Like, I know some people be mad at me, be like, oh, blah blah blah, but like, no, all those figures were shit. They're like Steve Austin action figures in the 90s were awful. Like, they didn't get good until the mid 2000s, where they started just having like regular action figures that didn't have a gimmick. They're fully articulated. They're very accurate, and those were Jakks. Jakks Pacific did those. They did the ones in the 90s too, but at some point they made the decision like, nah, we're just gonna do regular action figures. And then they had the Legends. That was big with the Legends action figures. Like, I have a Hulk Hogan one, but he has the blue tights, and it's like one of my favorite action figures. They're awesome. And it's funny because Jakks even did modern super styles in the LJN. Like, there's a Rock LJN doll style. And I thought that was really cool. The current figures that Mattel do, now the WWF, them being PG and stuff like that, they got the biggest toy maker in the world to do their toys. And so Mattel does their toys now. And a lot of them look really good. Like, I'm like contemplating buying some because they look that cool. I haven't bought any yet. And they have like retro ones too. Like, they have Ultimate Warrior, and they haven't had Hulk Hogan in a while, but Randy Savage, and there's exclusives and variants, and there's some you can only get at the Comic-Con or toy convention. So like, all those are all really cool, and kind of the evolution of action figures is completely ridiculous. And you go from these, they're dolls. The first ones were dolls. I don't know what, I know they're supposed to be action, they're dolls because there's no action to those figures. They're just like a big chunk of plastic, probably full of, like you said, lead and And it's hard. It's hard. Like, you find ones now, and they're really hard to find in good condition because the paint used to wear off. So I've seen nude Hulk Hogan's because they're all just, the paint just wore off and they're ridiculous.
Well, I will say, I remember, I think it was a Morocco figure that, like, somebody broke the arm and there was like metal wiring inside there.
Oh yeah,
like, it was not a good scene.
Just dangerous all around.
Yeah,
dangerous. And then in terms of other merchandise, they had I know in 1990 they had the Damien. They had like an inflatable Damien.
Yeah,
that came with the bag too. I thought that was pretty sweet. They had the foam 2x4 for Hacksaw Jim Duggan.
Foam 2x4.
Which I think I saw it on some show that I was watching, that probably the toy costs more than the actual 2x4, because you can go to Home Depot and buy a 2x4 for like $5.
Right.
But it doesn't say Hacksaw Jim Duggan on it. And then one of my favorites were Wrestling Buddies. I had Hulk Hogan, the Ultimate Warrior, and the Road Warrior, and I used to take them in the pool because I'm an idiot. And I ruined it. But like, I wrestled them in the pool because I could do maneuvers, right? I could jump off and I could do suplexes into the pool. And they got, once they got wet, because they're essentially a stuffed animal, they had some weight to it. You know what I mean?
Right.
So I wanted to beat the shit out of those all the time.
Yep.
And then I had the foam belts. I had the world champion. I had them all. I had the world championship. I had the Intercontinental, which is weird because it was brown. And then I had the tag team belts. And me and my friend Kyle were tag team champions. We beat the Legion of Doom. And those fuckers didn't sell for me either. It's ridiculous. Now, in terms of modern merchandise, and we'll talk about DVDs in a minute because that's huge now. A lot of it's based on, T-shirts are the big thing. And now that they're doing T-shirts that are not weird looking, that people are like, why is there a half-naked man on your shirt? Now it's all about like logos and sayings and stuff like that. So I think the emergence of T-shirts obviously started with Hulk Hogan and the Hulkamania shirt or the Hulk Rule shirt, and then kind of evolved from there. From the cool shirt was the DX shirt and the NWO shirt, which was huge. And then from there, probably the best-selling shirt of all time was the Austin 316.
Really?
T-shirt, yeah. I'm pretty sure that's the... Because they're still selling it to this day. So, yeah, John Cena sells a lot of T-shirts, but I don't think he's selling any... They've been selling Austin 316 shirts for 20 years. So lots of... Like, I'm looking at their website now, again, it's lots of T-shirts. But it sucks, because you can never really find all these shirts at a live event. So you would have to order them online. That's why they do so well abroad, because they sell a lot of merchandise abroad. Because if you're in Germany and you want to buy a No Way Jose T-shirt, that shipping is gonna be fucking unreal.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. And they may have distributors out in Europe, but I don't think they have everything. And now they have everything from dog collars on here, which is ridiculous, to scarves, which is even more ridiculous. I never got the scarves thing. Yeah, belt buckles and wallets and throw blankets and leashes and dandies and books and programs and pens and pencils and that. I remember I had a Trapper Keeper, and I currently have a WWF lunchbox that has Hulk Hogan, Ricky Steamboat, and Roddy Piper on it, I believe. I can't see it from here, but it's awesome. And going back to the merchandise catalog, do you know who one of the big models were for the WWF catalog?
Models?
Yeah.
I do not.
You see a 14-year-old Stephanie McMahon all over this fucking thing.
Really?
She does a lot of the T-shirts, and she looks ridiculous.
Huh.
I mean, I guess she looks like any other 14-year-old girl or 10-year-old girl wearing a Matilda T-shirt, but yeah, she's all over this fucking thing. It's pretty ridiculous.
Wow.
Yeah, she has her rocker shirt on, one of them, looking very 1991-ish. Like, bless her heart. It's completely ridiculous. No Shane O'Mac, though. I haven't seen any Shane O'Mac there. And I'm pretty sure that Stephanie's on the Open of SummerSlam 89, jumping into a pool, but I can't confirm that for some reason. And no one wants to answer my question if that was her or not. I'm pretty sure that's Vince's pool that someone's jumping into, because it'd be cheap to film there. Like, I have this nice pool, pal. Stephanie, jump on in. We're going to tape you. And that was the Open. And I'm pretty sure she's eating a watermelon. Go back and watch the opening to SummerSlam 89 and tell me if that's Stephanie McMahon or not. I'm going to ask her on Twitter, but she never answers my questions. I get real upset.
How dare she?
There are some guys that are really good about answering questions. Bruce Pritchard being one of them. And I told a story about Meltzer answering my question. But I know they're not going to answer my question for the most part. Still makes me mad, though. I don't know why. I don't like being ignored. I tried to send a Twitter message to Jack Tunney, and he didn't answer. Then I found out he was dead.
Oh, Jack Tunney.
I want to know if Elizabeth did favors for him or not. That's what Bannies Brown said. I think she did. Nah, I don't know for real. Maybe she did.
Jack Tunney.
He was on the take. He was Jack on the take, Tunney. That was completely ridiculous. So again, the evolution of merchandising. Now you see these things in your Kmart's and your Targets and your Walmart's, and you see them everywhere. Where back in the day, you really didn't get any WWF merchandise or wrestling merchandise in general. But since WWF are the biggest ones in terms of merchandise, you never saw those in stores. So you never saw like the shirts in stores. I know that they made a big change in the '90s, the late '90s, to make sure they were including in stores. But if I had to go school clothes shopping, and I wanted an Ultimate Warrior hoodie, I had to wait fucking 3 months. That happened to me one time. So I was 17 and I thought it was cool, and I wasn't cool. So I bought sneakers. So I bought sneakers off from a catalog.
Yeah.
And they didn't come in time for the first day of school, so I had to go to school with my old sneakers.
Oh.
Which is very first world problem-ish. I was very upset at the 7th, but what are you going to do?
A horror.
I gotta wear these old ass shoes. They're just like ratty looking tennis shoes. I get those Kevin Garnett's, man. This first pair of Nikes I bought too. But now they have John Cena jeans. I bought my son John Cena jeans like when he went back to school like 2 years ago at Kmart, and it's completely different now. He doesn't even like wrestling, which is a whole other disappointment in my life.
Yeah.
He likes Sin Cara.
Oh.
It's very upsetting.
Damn.
Yeah. All right, guys. So I wanna talk about something that came up recently. I really never even really thought about it before. You know, someone on Twitter was saying so and so is the greatest wrestler of all time, and I find that strange to me because I never really thought about it that way before. Like, who's the greatest of all time? Like, how would you even quantify that? Would it be drawing ability, work in the ring, charisma in interviews, overall impact to wrestling in general? Like, what's the criteria? So, Matt, what do you think the criteria, if we had to kind of follow it down to the greatest professional wrestler of all time, what criteria would you use?
Oh, boy. I would say, charisma with the fans. That's a big part of it. You know my feelings about Chris Benoit, but...
We'll want to talk about that at some point.
I think, just ability alone isn't enough. I think you have to have that right package of talent, drawing power, and I believe drawing power goes back to charisma because, like some people like Andre the Giant couldn't cut the best promo, but, he was enormous, and he was a spectacle.
He had a different type of charisma.
Right. Hogan is up there. Flair is up there for me. I think Flair is one of the greatest of all time because he did, work really well with different people. Why is Larry Nelson on my screen?
Why is he not on your screen?
I would say, Shawn Michaels is up there because I think he gave really great performances. He was good as a wrestler. Was funny. I could also say at a certain point, The Undertaker.
Okay.
He's one of the few wrestlers that has such a strong persona that it kind of goes above and beyond.
Let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
Is it fair to narrow it down to one? Like, is that a fair question in general?
I don't think you can say one. I almost think of it in the aspect of like, football players or certain athletes. Like, of that era, there's a guy who's the best of all time.
Right.
And I'll give you an example in football. Like Tom Brady to me is the best, right? But in the 80s and 90s, I would have said it was Joe Montana. But there are people who would say, like depending on the era you play in, kind of
Joe Montana, you crazy asshole.
John Montana. But it depends, I think that's part of it. And I think for wrestling, there's such a wide spectrum of
and it's like you can't even go by stats.
Right. I mean, there's so many aspects to it. I mean, yeah, there's moves, but like the build up to a certain kind of match. Like we just had this Goldberg-Lesnar squash.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the message boards, the iWar message board, we were talking about it and saying, well, if that's how they're going to build up the next match, that's fine. But I think about Goldberg and I go, well, that guy is a 10-minute wrestler at best. So
safe to say that Goldberg's not the greatest wrestler of all time?
It's very safe.
Okay.
But I do think there were some wrestlers that had amazing potential that got snuffed out. I think Owen Hart would have been a huge, huge star eventually.
I think by like 1998, I think he was really coming to his own in terms of a character.
Yeah.
Like I think by 2002, 2003, he would have been top guy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, for me, I really thought about this question, and I'm trying to quantify it in my head because you can be an asshole and say Jim Lundas. I'm the only one that would know who that is, but there's Jim Lundas, Lou Thez, Dory Funk Jr., Bruno Sammartino, Hulk Hogan, Steve Austin, The Rock, John Cena. So me take that group of guys, and I look for different things. So we'll start with John Cena. And the reason John Cena is one of the biggest things about greatest of all time, it's longevity, right?
Yeah.
So you got to do it for an extended period of time. Now, that will automatically disqualify Steve Austin, although he was probably the biggest star at during his era. So a lot of merchandise, big draw, huge ratings. He didn't do it for long enough. We'll talk 97 to 2003, 98 when he won the belt. That's 5 years. That's not a large sample size. The Rock's in the same boat. He didn't do it for long enough, and that was his. It wasn't like Austin because of injuries. He just went off to Hollywood,
right?
And he saved like 5-6 years. That was it. So they got. Although those guys are huge stars, and Rock is the biggest star on the planet now in terms of entertainment in general.
Yeah.
In terms of greatest wrestler of all time, that automatically disqualifies them. So those guys are out. Now, in terms of John Cena, again, he's 10 years on top at this point, right? Like his big push was in 2005 on top of 2006, I would say. Probably maybe a little bit earlier. Maybe he's on his 11th year. In terms of overall draw, it's hard with him because if you take John and you put him in 1985 WWF, where is he on the card? He ain't on top.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I think he's in the mid card. Not an indictment on John, but WWF from 1985 to 1991, that roster was fucking stacked.
Yeah.
Like, would you put John over Piper? Would you put John over Ricky Steamboat? Would you put John over Mr. Perfect? Would you put John over Ted DiBiase? Would you put him over Randy Savage? You ain't putting him over Hogan, Andre, Jake Roberts. Like, where would John fit on the card? So, to me, John doesn't cut it in terms of the greatest of all time. Although he draws numbers, does okay in terms of ratings. Ridiculous amount of merchandising sales, and now he's coming to his own, just like The Rock, in terms of a Hollywood star, entertainment star.
Right.
So you go to Hogan. Take Hogan out of 1985 WWF, and you put him in 2016 WWF. I think he's the top guy.
No, yeah, I would say the one. Actually, more I think about it, I think probably one of the best ever. Because I think one of the tricks of it is, could they play the heel and the villain as well?
Yeah.
It's like an actor. You say, who's the greatest actors of all time, right? And you think of some of those actors can play both bad guys, good guys, all kinds of characters.
And that's what hurts Bruno.
Right, and it hurts John Cena.
Yeah.
Like, he played a bad guy for a short time, but he was never, whatever. But
he was on top.
I would say Randy Savage comes to mind.
Yeah.
Because his persona was so strong. And, he was just this, identifiable character. That stands out to me. Flair played both good guy and bad guy, but I'd say, he was obviously more of a...
He was the same character. It's just the fans changed around him.
Exactly.
The funny thing with Hogan, and we know what his detractors would say. He can't wrestle bell to bell.
But he can't.
But here's the thing. Hulk Hogan, 6'8", 302 pounds. How many wrestlers who are quote-unquote good workers at that size, like, can chain wrestle and do shit? How many?
Yeah.
I know one, and that's it. And that's The Undertaker. Undertaker's slightly bigger. Undertaker's like 6'10", probably maybe 310, 320. Right. And he can work. He can work with the Shawn Michaels, and he can do a little chain wrestling. He didn't start out that way. He was able to evolve and become a really good in-ring technician.
Right.
Hogan, for his size, is probably the second best wrestler in his size and weight range. Like, who's up there? It's Giant Baba, Big John Studd, Andre, Big Show, Dan Spivey, Kevin Nash, and you probably say Scott Hall. Scott Hall's probably a better worker than Hulk Hogan, so that's two. Scott Hall's like 6'6". So how would you want him to work? Is he going to do you want someone that's 6'8", 302 to wrestle like Luthez?
Right.
Would that be believable? He was, doing headlock takedowns on fucking Juan Rivera or fucking Lanny Poffo? It's fucking ridiculous. He does a fucking sunset flip on fucking Lanny Poffo. Just picture that in your head right now. It'd be completely ridiculous. So in terms of Hulk Hogan, in terms of overall charisma, drawing ability, it's hard to compare ratings because the ratings have changed since the 80s. Pay-per-view buys, that's changed. It wasn't accessible in every home, that kind of stuff. So, but then you take the money he made and increase it by inflation, like, it's pretty ridiculous in terms of what he drew nationwide, globally. Merchandise he did sell. You know what I mean? So, Hogan is there. Now, we go back to Bruno. What's the knock on Bruno? He didn't draw outside the Northeast. That's what people claim. That's not true. He wasn't booked very often outside the Northeast, but every time he went someplace, he did draw. You know what I mean? So, I think he's a big draw in Canada. When he worked for Maple Leaf Wrestling in the Tunnies, he was the number one guy, big draw. So, that's kind of a misnomer, although technically Toronto was in the Northeast, I think, right? But I think what hurts him, he doesn't have the merchandise sales, maybe, but there wasn't no merchandise to really sell for him.
Yeah.
So it's hard to kind of put him in that. Like, where does Bruno fit in 1985 WWF? You putting him over Hogan? You putting him over Savage? Probably not.
Yeah.
Probably not. The same thing goes for Dory Funk, Luthez. Again, it's hard to compare eras like that. Jim Lundis, who was the biggest draw early in wrestling, then when we got the guy who built Madison Square Garden in terms of wrestling. So, to be completely honest, I hate to say it, guys gonna get mad at me. Hulk Hogan's greatest of all time. It pains me personally how big of a Randy Savage fan I am. It kind of pains me to say that, but for fuck's sake, I think Hulk Hogan's the greatest of all time. Like, by any kind of metric you want to look at, you want to look at overall impact on the wrestling industry. Do you think John Cena had a bigger impact in wrestling than Hulk Hogan?
No.
Like, Hulk Hogan took it from the fucking smoky-filled arenas and what have you, and Hulkamania and that kind of shit, and kind of set the table for guys like Steve Austin and The Rock. I don't even think Steve Austin has made a bigger impact as Hulk Hogan. He was the beneficiary of kind of where the business went and kind of exploded the business, and it was a huge box office draw. But I don't think he had the lasting impact on the industry. And same thing with The Rock. Rock has a impact and a lasting legacy in the industry that's negative. And I'll tell you why. Because when Rock left the WWF the first time, two things happened. Number one, instead of focusing on building up new and different characters, they kind of wanted everyone to be The Rock. And you could tell the way they worked OVW and the way their promos, like everyone, they stopped cutting money promos, they cut entertainment promos. Money promos is like, at SummerSlam, Zeus, I'm going to destroy you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And they're just like, they're trying not to be funny. John Cena does it sometimes too. And it's like, he's just out there etching people. And I think that negatively impacted the business. Now, in terms of John Cena and his impact, and the one thing that has come to mind, I heard this on the podcast the other day, and it goes into why people don't think that the wrestlers today are stars or big stars or as big as the stars of the past. And I think what it comes down to is that the star of the show is the brand. They're not going to push anyone above the brand. The thing that draws for the WWE today are the letters WWE. They don't care who's on the roster. They don't care what matches are there. It's the WWE that draws now. And I think for them, they're scared to push anyone above the brand for fear of what happened with The Rock. They invested a lot of time and money, and The Rock leaves and goes to Hollywood. The Rock should be still wrestling to this. He should be wrestling 2016. He was a young guy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, he came to the WWF when he's 22, 23 years old in 1996. So that was 20 years ago. Like, he's 45. What is he right now? Like my wife says, there's no need to guess if you have the internet. So The Rock, Dwayne Johnson. Dwayne Johnson is 44 years old. So like for a lot of guys like Flair and Hogan, they were still on top of their game at this point. Maybe not Hogan, but Flair was still on top of his game at 44 years old. So Imagine having The Rock throughout this entire period of time. So I think the WWE is kind of hesitant to push anyone above the brand. Now, if you believe rumor and innuendo, like they say on the Bruce Pritchard show, that there's some tension between John Cena and WWE, I believe WWE have nothing for him. I think he wants to come back in the ring, or he wants to do Hollywood projects, and they're pitching like angles and shit for him that he doesn't really want to do or feel comfortable doing, or he doesn't think it's a draw. So I find that really interesting. That I think over the last 10 years they don't want to push any, like, we want to make you the most famous wrestler in the world, but we don't want to make you the most famous person in the world. And I think that's where they're currently at. Hulk Hogan for a period of time was one of the most famous people in the world. My mom knew who Hulk Hogan was. My mom knows who The Rock is. My mom doesn't know who Ric Flair is, or Steve Austin, or even John Cena. That's the gauge. That's the indicator, at least to me. Hulk Hogan, greatest of all time. Son of a bitch. And the last thing I want to talk about on today's episode, again, this is the NWA 1983 project. The concept of the show, what you're watching currently on the screen, is what if the NWA went national in 1983, which was the last great years for the territories until they started falling apart in 84. And what if the NWA went national? So in this mystical, magical world, I get a whole bunch of money, go back in time, buy out the NWA outright, go into various promoters and get them to work with me, which are Bill Watts, Jerry Jarrett, Carlos Colon, Eddie Graham, Sam Mushnick, Bob Geigel, Don Owens, Giant Baba, Tony Inoki, Jim Crockett, Ole Anderson. Really merge, and we're going to have one person who's booking out everything, and we're going to go national. We're going to go national on TBS, Superstation. We're going to go national on ESPN. And then obviously you're going to have your local TVs. And you have the closed circuit event as we get into the advent of pay-per-view. But we're still going to have Network Saturday Night's Main Event special at some point. We'll get into that at some point. So, in terms of building the infrastructure of a company, and we talked about it on a past episode about building an infrastructure, I just recently listened to a podcast that's on the MLW Radio Network. I'm a VIP member, so I'll get exclusive podcasts. And they have one called Making History. Take a particular subject and do very much like we do. We talk history here, and we talk about personalities and people, and they just did a profile on Jim Barnett. Now, for those of you who don't know who Jim Barnett is, he was always the guy behind the scenes. He was the promoter of the original World Championship Wrestling in Australia. He was the promoter of the Indianapolis territory. He was the promoter of Georgia during the Georgia Civil War that we covered on this program. Super important figure. Was there early, even as early as the Goldust Trio early in New York, Madison Square Garden. You're talking about Dumont Network in the 50s, getting wrestling on network television. He was there for all of it. And this man, literally from the beginning of wrestling to pushing for John Cena to ascend to the top of the card in the WWF, this guy's he's done it all. And you're talking about someone who had the biggest impact on professional wrestling. There's Vince McMahon, and there's Jim Barnett. Jim Barnett orchestrated the deal to sell Crockett to Turner. He was very instrumental in the expansion of the WWF in terms of syndication because he had all the contacts. This guy was really well connected, high society guy, knew everyone, hung out with celebrities. In some cases, dated celebrities. And that's a whole nother topic. We'll get into that in a second. But he was someone, if I'm looking to go national, and his biggest thing was to go national. He wanted to go national, but he was afraid that someone was going to kill him if he started breaking down. Like he was, and maybe in the 70s and in the 60s, maybe that would have happened. You don't know what, maybe connected guys that some of these promoters had partners with and that kind of stuff. And maybe that's a really legitimate threat where that may have not been the threat in 1983. Although there was always people saying we're going to kill Vince, but that never happened. Harley Race brings the gun, starts pointing at Hogan. That happened. And they try to set the ring on fire. But if I'm looking to expand nationally, I'm going to need him on my team. And the way I would pitch it to him, because again, he's someone that he loved to be a socialite. He was high society. And if we're moving the NWA office from wherever it is, I don't think they even had an office. It was just whoever the president's office was. But we're going to move the NWA headquarters maybe from St. Louis or Charlotte or Green, wherever it is. I'm not even sure where it is. If someone knows where it was, please let me know. We're going to move that to Los Angeles. And we're going to need someone who has a connection in the entertainment industry, who knows celebrities, or maybe get celebrities to come to the show. I just recently saw a picture of Debbie Harry from Blondie hanging out at Madison Square Garden with like Jimmy Valiant and Andre the Giant. And I always felt having celebrities as fans being able to spotlight them in the crowd, not have them work the match. Maybe be a guest ring announcer or timekeeper. That's super important. But just to have wrestling be the hot thing, the it thing, the things that all the cool celebrities are doing, and they love it and they're not ashamed of it, would bring in more fans, especially if we're doing stuff out of Los Angeles. So I think having Jim Barnett on our team would be super important, and probably the most important piece at NWA expansion national. Now, the thing about Jim Barnett that I want to bring up, and I don't want to gloss over this, and I'm going to have a frank conversation here. Jim Barnett was an openly gay man. In an era where that wasn't commonplace, and in some cases that could be particularly dangerous. But he didn't care. He was an openly gay man in the industry that dealt with a lot of, maybe you're not your most tolerant people. Could only imagine what Ole Anderson thought. But no, he made it work, and minus the Thin 30 Kentucky football team scandal in 1962 and a possible love affair with the actor Rock Hudson, which we don't know if that's legitimate or not, but that's always been a rumor. To me, that's very interesting to me to see how, someone that probably had to deal with a lot of shit, and he didn't care. Like, that's just me. We're gonna make a lot of. We're gonna go in business and make a lot of money. I don't care what you think about me. I find that very. There's some people who fight for civil rights by marching and protesting.
Yeah.
There's other people who do things for civil rights by being the most successful person that they can be, and I think that's what he did. He became the most successful person he could be. That's amazing to me for some reason, and I don't know why, but I think that's really cool. So I just want to take a couple minutes out to just talk about Jim Barnett and a little bit and how I would need him. For this national expansion, if I was going to do an NWA 1983 expansion globally, I would definitely need his help there. And to kind of shout out the guys at MLW Radio who do Eric Bischoff's podcast, and they do Ric Flair's podcast, and they do Jim Cornette's podcast, and they do Kevin Sullivan's podcast, and they do have a lot of extras if you become a VIP member, which is only $1.99 a month, and you get a whole lot of content for that price. I think it's fantastic. And I think currently, for the next month, if I'm not mistaken, and this is not a plug, I'm just stating the obvious here, it's free, the VIP package. So you get a little bit extra Jim Cornette, you get a couple of the different shows that are not available to the public. And Making History is one of those shows, and they talk about El Santo, and they talk about stuff that I'm interested in because I'm ridiculous. They talk about the Gold Dust Trio and Toots Montt and some of this, a show on Dusty Rhodes and the Great American Bash and really cool subject matter. So I definitely recommend that wholeheartedly. So guys, we are officially out of time. So for Matt Riley and Terry Funk, I'm Lex G.